we shall be enough. Basically, we have lost touch for a long period of time, so good to be back again. So welcome to the session for environment and ecology, where from today we shall be initiating the discussion over the next 10 modules about this subject of environment and ecology. Now, when we talk about this particular subject here, it has basically got an intrigue associated with it, where many different types of candidates, they face difficulty in approaching this subject. Now here, you have to understand that this particular subject has not always historically been a different area which UPSC has been concentrating. Earlier, UPSC used to ask 2 to 3 questions from this area of environment and ecology. And basically that could be covered by studying the biogeography portion itself. It was only after 2014 where UPSC started picking up more and more questions from environment and ecology, where after that, the candidates have been required to study the subject separately. Now, when we talk about this particular subject, there is also an increased amount of trepidation, increased amount of reservation amongst the candidates that what should we study here? Because when we talk about environment ecology, when you talk to your peers, your colleagues, that this is the subject I have to study, immediately, the perception built in the mind is that maybe we'll have to learn all the species names, maybe we'll have to learn all the factual data, etc. And that increases the fear perception in your mind, due to which this subject becomes difficult. From today onwards, we shall be working towards together decluttering this subject and ensuring that we understand the requirement of this subject for the examination. Now, when we talk about this particular subject, it is very pertinent for us to understand the importance of this subject and also the approach required. Now, importance, if you talk about it, this is relevant, this particular subject is relevant even for your prelims, also for your mains examination. In prelims, every year, you have close to around 12 to 15 questions which are asked from this area directly. Total number of modules in this will be 10. Okay. In prelims, close to around 12 to 15 questions you'll find are asked from this area every year. Now, the classification can also be done that amongst these questions, you'll find that if you have covered this sessions carefully, if you have covered and understood the examples meticulously well, then out of these 12 to 15 questions, there is no reason why you should not be able to bag around 8 to 10 questions correctly, provided that you are updated with the current affairs as well. That is a very important prerequisite for this particular subject. This is not one of those typical subjects where whatever is given in the book, you keep on ratifying and repeating that particular book itself and the work will be done. No. Here, out of these 12 to 15 questions, you'll find that around 4 to 5 questions, they come directly from the static portion. Around 4 to 5 questions, they come from the issues which are in discussion in current affairs. And then you have a couple of questions which are framed, which are factual in nature, which you might know, you might not know. But here in this session, we shall be covering the portion of current affairs also, which has happened up till date. But then you still will have the daunting task in front of you that from now on, the important current affairs which keep on happening up till the next year prelims or the year after that prelims, whichever you are appearing for, that is something that you have to address on your own as well. Now here, it is not only relevant for your prelims, but also for your mains examination. In mains examination, here you get questions in GS paper 3. And there you can have questions worth 40 to 45 marks or 50 marks, which is quite substantial for that matter. Minimum of 50, and this year it was much more than that. So roughly around 50-60 marks of questions will be asked in GS paper 3, which you will be able to address very easily well from the PPTs itself. I'll tell you about the resource requirement as well. But before that, let me talk about the approach. I understand right now the immediate anxiety will be what are the materials that are required to be studied, etc. I'll come to it. But the approach required for this subject, that is important to be understood. Because almost every individual candidate that you will meet, they have a preconceived notion that for environment, I need to read this particular book, I will go through this book and my work will be done. But that is not the case. When we talk about this particular topic of, or this particular subject of environment, what is the type of questions, or what are the topics from which questions are generally framed? So you'll find topics such as the basics of ecosystems, right? What do we understand by ecosystems? What do we understand, for example, by habitat, biomes, right? So the what of it, for example, certain basic terminologies such as ecological succession, certain terminologies or certain areas such as wetlands, mangroves, these are coral reefs. These are one of the favorite areas, or these are few of the favorite areas for UPSC. So all these portions, understand, if you get the clear picture about, let's suppose, what a wetland is and what are the role, what are the various different functions that a wetland actually does. If you are aware of that, then year after year, if a question keeps on getting asked from there, you will be in a safe position, right? So that is the approach that we need to have. Now, another thing which creates a lot of anxiety amongst the candidates is that you have so many different conventions, so many different protocols that we need to cover: Montreal Protocol, Vienna Convention, Kigali Amendment, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, CITES, CBD. What is it that we need to study out of this, and how do we learn all of this? You have the Wildlife Protection Act, the Forest Conservation Act, the amendment to the Forest Conservation Act, which has been done this year. So that also creates a fair amount of trepidation amongst the candidates, and it will be quite frank enough to admit that this is one of the tougher areas. So what we are going to formulate as a strategy for covering this subject is, for example, when we are going to tackle the problem of pollution, for example, pollution in the region of Delhi is one of the prime areas of discussion nowadays. So when we are going to tackle that area of pollution, immediately we shall be dealing with the conventions associated with that. For example, we will be studying about the Rotterdam, the Stockholm Convention, the Bonn Convention almost immediately after that. So that is where the interlinkage of the portion of current affairs with the static portion, as soon as we are able to facilitate that interlinkage, that will help you and will facilitate an easier memory and easier recollection at the time of exam. You need to be able to identify that, for example, if let's suppose a question has been asked about Rotterdam Convention, you need to be able to identify what it is associated with. If that is the case, then automatically you will be able to sieve through that what is required to be answered in this and how you have to approach that question. In this, there are many factual topics also. There is no denying the fact that there are factual topics also where you don't have any option but to go through it, that it comes under which ministry, this particular body, is it statutory or not. So I will provide you with a comprehensive list of those areas also, so that you can go through them before your examination. Now, in the approach that we shall be developing for the 10 modules, right? In this 10 modules, we are going to go through the entire journey, where the aim has to be that by the end of it, we shall be covering both the static as well as the dynamic portion. And when we talk about the static and dynamic portion, these are not something that you affix in different silos. Here, the more you are able to associate with them, the more you are able to relate to the real world examples around you, things which appear in news around you, you will be in a better position to answer these questions. So in static, what is it that we'll cover? For example, ecosystem. What do we understand by an ecosystem? What do we understand by a biome? What are the different types of biomes, right? Then, for example, the issue of pollution, aspects such as wetlands, mangroves. Now, for example, when we will study mangroves, at the same time, we will also be studying the Mishti scheme, right? Which has been initiated by the government, announced by the government in this year's budget, which will help us increase the mangrove vegetation. We will also be studying about the Mangrove Alliance for Climate. So that is how as soon as we are going to cover a static portion, we will have an endeavor to associate and form a linkage with the current affairs portion also, so that you have a clear-cut interrelation which has to be established. Because in the mains examination, generally the questions will be asked will be if of a framework. For example, UAE, Indonesia, they have initiated a campaign or initiated a program, that is Mangrove Alliance for Climate, under which they are envisaging the increase in the area which are under mangroves. So in mains, the question and the framing of the question will be such that what is Mangrove Alliance for Climate? First part. Second part will be discuss the benefits of mangroves in a coastal ecosystem or in the natural ecosystem. So you have to answer that by understanding where mangroves are going to help, how they are going to help, and then interrelate it to the current affairs. So if we follow this approach, which I urge you, advise you, suggest you, recommend to you also, you will find it easier to answer the mains paper. After all, I hope we have developed that thinking by now, that it is the mains that you target. Once you are targeting the mains, prelims is basically, if it doesn't get converted today, it will definitely get converted tomorrow. But if your preparation is not up to the mains level, even if you convert the prelims, you are just another candidate, rolling candidate, who will appear for the exam year after year after year. So that is why target the mains examination, so that once you get through the prelims, you eventually come out with the merit list with a rank in your hand. Okay. Now, then, for example, corals. Then, for example, even the portion of, we are going to cover biodiversity, conservation of species. And here we shall be studying about legislations, we shall be studying about international conventions, protocols, amendments. That is what we are going to look upon. And also, as is the case with the rest of the subjects also, when we address the prelims questions in bulk, the previous year prelims question, in this, because there are so many diversified topics here, we shall also try that after each of these modules, we shall take up the questions, prelims questions associated with that immediately. And I shall try to give you an idea about what kind of question can be framed from these particular topics, so that you also, while you carry out your revision process, you have some visibility about which area to stress upon greatly or which area to leave a lesser amount of preparation with. Now comes the study material or the books that you have to refer for the subject. Now, here, let me be very categorically clear. Please restrict yourself to the PPT and the additional reading materials which are given to you, other than the portion of current affairs. Okay, so excuse me. So here, please restrict yourself to the PPTs, the additional reading materials, and then the portion of current affairs. Now, how do you tackle current affairs in this portion of environment? Because few of the questions, they are factual in nature also. And that is where you need a better exposure to this area. And that is where, going by the past trends, even though it might sound a bit unconventional, it might not be the ideal recommendation that is handed out to you in the market. But I would also advise you that please do browse through various different documentaries and docu-series which are available now, because you have some of the very random questions which are picked up from those particular documentaries. For example, this year, 2023, you found that the paper was quite random. Now, instead of chasing that from the various books, that this fact was mentioned in that particular book, that particular trivia was mentioned in a different book, so I will study 4 books altogether, that is simply not possible. So look through these documentaries. It will improve your understanding, enhance your understanding as well. So for the materials here, let me be very categorical. PPT, the annotations of it, the class discussion, plus additional reading materials, plus current affairs. Now, how do you follow this current affairs? So first of all, from next month, we have been mulling over this initiative for some time. We are going to implement it from next month. From next month, we will be holding a separate webinar session for current affairs of environment ecology. Right now, the webinars that are conducted, you have mains related webinar, you have weekly current affairs related webinar. From next month onwards, we are going to have subject specific webinars. It is being formulated. It will be communicated to you as well at a later point of time. But we shall also be trying to have a separate session of webinar only for environment and ecology, where we shall be covering the current affairs associated topics from the portion of environment and ecology, which has been in discussion throughout the month. So here you can take the help of webinars. See, additional reading materials might not necessarily cover the portion of current affairs, but it shall provide you the basic reading material of the PPTs along with that. Wherever possible, I'll try to make the PPT self-descriptive so that once you revise, it is easier for you. You don't have to wonder what is written there or what was discussed there. But then the definition part of it, the example part of it, all those portions, you shall get a clear picture by these ARMs. So these current affairs you shall come across in the webinars, plus the monthly magazine that I'm sure you would be going through for your preparation of prelims. You would be going through the monthly magazines. Now you also have the Down to Earth. Down to Earth is a magazine which I would recommend to you for everyone. Go through it. It is available online also. You don't necessarily have to go through each and every sentence of it. But then I have been observing this, and I am sure amongst you also, whosoever has analyzed the trend of the question paper, from 2017-18 onwards, there has been a shift in the type of question which is being framed both for prelims as well as mains exam, where you will find sometimes issues related to climate, sometimes newer technologies in agriculture, irrigation, newer seeding methodologies, the problems associated with dry conditions, etc., droughts. All of these are mentioned in Down to Earth. And these are the topics which UPSC picks up either for your prelims or for your mains exam. So if you are tackling this portion of Down to Earth, if you are just browsing through the important topics of Down to Earth, it will help you address vital areas of your mains exam along with the prelims preparation also. So this is one of those magazines that I would recommend for your current affairs. And by the way, this strategy that I am telling you about the materials, even those of you who are preparing for, let's say, 2025, 2026, or even 2061, whenever you are going to appear for the examination, follow this particular methodology and don't wait that the preconceived notion amongst many of us is that I am appearing for the exam in 2025, so I'll start following current affairs from May next year. Please don't have that. Now, if you have initiated the preparation now and you are appearing for 2025 or 2026, as I have oftentimes repeated, there is no reason why you should not be able to gain so much amount of proficiency that not only do you crack the exam in the first attempt, you crack it with maybe a double digit or single digit rank. So start following the portion of current affairs from now itself. It will give you a better perspective, and thereby you will be able to analyze the trend for next year paper, year after that paper also, and you will be much better prepared when the time comes when you are appearing for the examination. Along with that, yes, the current affairs magazine has got some of the analysis of Down to Earth, but generally I would suggest to you browse through the article, search it online. So for any particular issue, browse through it online. It is very sometimes data driven. You don't have to memorize all the data, but certain topics such as deforestation and its linkage to scarcity or deficit of rainfall. Now, these are the topics, these are the perspectives, desertification, for example. So these are the perspectives which shall help you immensely, right? So here, after this, please add on few of the docu-series also. So, for example, our planet, right? Then life on Earth, then our national parks, right? These are very easy to watch, and these basically, much of this is available on YouTube. Whichever is available free on YouTube, only watch that. Don't spend a lot of money for watching these docuseries. So here, when you watch these, what is the purpose of it? The purpose should not be that you should sit with a pen and paper and start jotting down every detail which is being said there, but you gain an overall perspective that how life form is impacted by the variations and the realities of atmospheric condition, ground condition, etc., evolution, how it has led to a certain condition. So that perspective you will gain if you watch these. So there will be an overall better understanding and an interlinkage that you shall be able to form with the subject of geography also. Please understand that this particular subject has got a very, very strong interlinkage with the subject of geography, right? I see that many of us, amongst us, we have already attended the session of geography. So we might not be having that level of proficiency up till now in the subject, but even the basic idea about, for example, what are the variations in climate in a region, what do we understand by variations in humidity, about the ground surface in a region, even that basic idea if you have, right, that is more than sufficient to understand why is it that certain species need to migrate from one area to another, why is it that certain species are to be found only in one region of the world and not in the other. So that is where, as long as you will keep on interrelating it, you will keep on interrelating it to the various concepts, current affairs, etc. Please understand, why do I always keep on repeating this concept of interrelation is, if you start learning the facts individually, it is absolutely possible that you might forget one of them or a couple of them. But if you have interlinked it, let's say deforestation to land degradation, and then eventually to the bond challenge of it, United Nations Convention on Climate Change, you might forget one of those, but the other one might help you out in the exam. So always look at the bigger picture. Okay, so that is what we are going to follow in these 10 modules. In the initial four to five modules, we shall be approaching the static portion with full force, and it is the base that we lay in those first to 4 to 5 modules and 6 modules of discussion, which will help you understand the following modules as well. Okay, now do we have any questions about that? Ananya, I'm also appearing in 2020, but because of I cannot get much time to attend webinars, uh, can I do CNA only or the webinar only? See, the overall current affairs coverage, Ananya, is important. Webinar per month, as per the plan, we shall have only one webinar for environment ecology. Go through the recordings of it. If you are not able to attend live, go through the recordings, but always advisable that go through the live sessions, because live sessions help you build that perspective when you go through it. Recordings, the problem with the recordings is that the student is unable to stay disciplined for that long time, in the sense that you watch it 15 minutes, then you take a break, then you again watch it for 10 minutes, then again you will take a break. So that discontinuity, if you want to avoid, you want to take in at one go, not keep it pending. So attend the live webinars. It will be once a month, easier to attend. Do we need to cover all the conference of parties? The answer is no. The latest ones need to be covered. And yes, another from this, that brings us to another misconception that is very prevalent amongst the candidates. How many of us, amongst us, how many of us feel that for this subject, we need to learn the names of all the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, tiger reserves, the biosphere reserves, the critically endangered species? How many of us, we have that perception that we need to learn that? And be very open and honest, right? Quite a few number of you. right? So please understand, please don't entangle yourself in that web of rectifying, regardless of whatever your friends are doing, regardless of whatever people on YouTube are dictating to you. Because now, in the age of social media, the problem is not the lack of information, the problem is overflow of information. You have so many different directives and suggestions coming all around you. You yourself will be confused whether this person is telling me that I don't need to read a book, but there are other people who are telling me that this book is very instrumental. So, always I would suggest to you national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, Ramsar sites, tiger reserves, elephant reserves, biosphere reserves, all of these critically endangered species. You don't have to learn them. If you are thorough and regular in current affairs, if you are reading the current affairs like a human, not a computer, what I mean to say by that is that if you, when I say that looking at current affairs like a computer, so you come across a topic that in Namdafa protected area this has happened. Okay, in Namdafa protected area this has happened. I will learn this. Okay, then in Katarnia Ghat this has happened. You have to be aware that which part of the country is being talked about. When you talk about any particular species, for example, in current affairs there was a lot of discussion about Great Nicobar project. That how the Great Nicobar project or infrastructure development in the Great Nicobar project that was abandoned because of lacunae in getting environmental clearance. Now, what I saw as a trend where almost everybody, they learned the details of the Great Nicobar project, and that's it. But when you read that, why Great Nicobar project is problematic, because there you have critical habitat and critical ecosystems. You have species such as dugong, species such as leatherback turtle, which might get endangered. Now, once you come across these kind of current affairs, your immediate prerogative should be that I should be knowing more about the leatherback turtle. I should be knowing the basic about these dugongs, right? So that when you cover it in this way, you will have an overall larger view, larger coverage of current affairs. You shall not be left overburdened. And it is the case, my dear friends. I would have told you multiple times before that also, if we have had a chance to interact before. It is the case where majority of the candidates, regardless of how much preaching, how much suggestions I give, 10 days before the prelims or 15 days before the prelims, when the entire world panics, they panic and then they realize that they have only been concentrating on one part of environment, and they want a shortcut that give me the topics that are going to come for the exam. That is not how the subject will work. This subject, the trend has been that of accumulated knowledge. What is it that you have accumulated? For example, 2023, you had a question which was asked that which of these following species, by fluttering of their wings, gives an idea about how far the food is available and how much food is available. Now think about it. The answer was honeybees. Think about it. Where would you come across this particular fact? These are certain questions on which you should not judge yourself, even while analyzing your PYQs. This is based on your accumulated information. If you know it, fair enough. If you don't know it, so be it. 99.99% of the candidates won't be knowing it at all. That is a guarantee. But then, when we weigh ourselves based upon these PYQs, that is where we start losing the confidence, we start getting disheartened. Don't lose your confidence. That is why I'm again repeating. You might have few of the topics of current affairs which are dicey here and there, but if you stick to these basic materials, PPTs, ARMs, monthly magazines, or down to earth and webinars, or current affairs, wherever newspapers that you are following, more than enough. You cannot possibly study more than that. And that is a guarantee. Many of you would have one or the other book, but then we will cover all of that comprehensively in the session itself. Ruhan, which book better, IMF or Shankar? So, see, whichever book you like, you can follow. But when I say so, please wait for these completion of 10 modules. Let us cover these 10 modules. After that, you are free to choose any book, and please check whether any portion is uncovered relevant for the examination. So again, I would repeat, rather than going from pillar to post for any certain book, please restrict yourself for the 10 modules of the PPT. That is always advisable. It will help you revise them easier also. Revision is very important in this subject. If you are unable to revise, regardless of how many books that you have covered, you will end up failing miserably in the examination. Okay. And NCRTs also you can cover. Class 12th NCRTs, chapter 13 to 16, 17. That shall give you some idea. But there also, the basics we are going to cover in this portion also. Santosh, is it okay if we avoid book and study thoroughly PPT and ARM? Absolutely, yes. Target is how to cover old current affairs as I've started preparing just 2 months back. Ritu, I would suggest to you that start covering it with the monthly magazine one by one. And then, for example, spend 3 days to cover the monthly magazine of June, another 3 days to cover the monthly magazine of July, then spend 2 days to revise those June and July current affairs, another 3 days for the monthly magazine of August, another 2 days for the revision of June, July, August now. So like that, compound the revision and you will be able to have a good grip over it. Yes, Shruti, that is also enough. And Gulam, for environment current affairs only webinar is sufficient or newspaper? Both you can supplement. How to revise current affairs? So whichever monthly magazine that you are comfortable with, keep on reading that. Generally, the pattern should be that, as I just now told, that let's suppose you have studied the monthly magazine for the month of June, then you have studied the monthly magazine for the month of July. Rather than directly jumping into the month of August, spend some time to revise June and July. Then you cover August, September, then again revise it from June, July, August, September. Then again cover October, then again revise June, July, September, October, August, September, October. So by this process, what you do, that every few days you are revising those previous current affairs so that it is not just a footnote in your memory, it is very much fresh. So that should be a technique which should be used. And Manas, I am preparing for UPSC 2025. Is it necessary for me to take up the current affairs from the past? No, no. If you are appearing for 2025, start the current affairs from now itself. Notes of newspaper or just rely on monthly magazine should be more than sufficient, Prem. Weekly current affairs webinar will continue after we are still finalizing that, Devansh, but basically all the different subjects we are trying to cover it separately so that you have a different perspective for the questions for the current affairs of IR, for example, all the current affairs related to art and culture, for example. So that is something that we are going to address. Would it be okay if I read the magazine just? You can. Is there necessity to make note of monthly magazine? Absolutely not. Can I cover magazine of 4 months in 1 month? Absolutely yes. And what is the relevance of environment ecology for geography? Optional. You have many of the questions. Even in geography for GS now, you have questions which are associated with environment and ecology. So it is very much relevant. For example, when we talk about conservation, right, or climate change, you have many questions associated with climate change. And here we will study climate change in as much detail as we can, right? A candidate should be elite from elite college is myth or reality? Absolutely a myth. I have been made aware of the fact that I I think there is a video on social media or something where somebody has told that 99% of the candidates are from elite college, and that basically many of you have become anxious about that. Trust me when I say so. Many of the people that I know who are in services as of now, they have their posting. I know many of the people who are who have just now completed the basic foundation course in Labasna as well. Trust me when I say so, it is not the case that you need to be from an elite college. No, that is simply not the case. If you are certain about what needs to be studied, if you are dedicated enough that, okay, this is my goal, I need to achieve it without any excuses, I will work towards it. Because many of the candidates, they spend their entire preparation period in finding excuses that this was not adequate, that was not, it was very hot at that point of time, I was not comfortable during the winters, I could not, during the winters it was so cold I could not work. So unless and until you are falling into that category, if you are very determined that I have to clear this examination, let or come what may, I will clear this, there is no reason why you would not succeed, period. You will succeed, right? This is just another exam for just another job in this world. It has got nothing to do with what your educational background till now has been. It is pertinent to understand what your future step is going to be. Where these, it will be available on YouTube. At the time of prelims examination, before 1 year current affairs for each subject is 2 classes. Okay, we'll think about it. If environment question is asked in geography paper, then how to write answer from geography perspective. There you have to bring your analysis of geography into the pic, depending upon the demand of the question, Devansh. But there you don't have to be afraid of talking about the portions of environment as well. I'm aiming for IFOS, and its GS paper always includes a question from environment. So, see, the questions of even forest services, Anurag, very easily can be tackled. Just have the basic concept developed. We will develop the basic concept. That is something I guarantee. I give you as an assurance that if you are regular for the first 5 to 7 sessions, you will develop that concept on your own. And I will also help you develop the chronology for these conventions, protocols, etc., which will help you look at the larger picture. It should not be the case that randomly I am studying and learning about the Kyoto Protocol. Randomly I am studying about Conference of Parties. No, there is a flow. The world works in a particular kind of a pattern. You have to be smart enough to look through that. So that is something that we will ensure in the session. Trust me, after that, you will develop the perspective. Sustainable development is not part of this, even though I will give you an idea with the help of the Brundtland report, etc. But you will cover it in society. In what ways it could help in geology or botany optional for forest services? They are good. In forest services, anyways, the mains examination is not very difficult. So a preliminary or you should basically, if you are only appearing for forest services, you should dig deeper. It is easier to clear, provided you have worked so hard in the prelims. Days of webinar, it will be communicated whenever that will happen. Whenever we have finally arrived at that plan, it will be communicated to you. As exam is coming closer, I'm losing my hope and getting scary. Trust me, my dear friend, all the 5 lakh candidates who are going to appear for the examination, they would be feeling the same. Many of them would be much more afraid than you as well. Trust me when I say so. Every successful candidate that you come across, they have been afraid even up till the point of interview. The only thing that you can do in order to help yourself right now is continue to revise whichever portion you have studied. Continue to revise so that as you cover that portion, you have that confidence that I know I have control over that area. I'll study something new, I will revise that also, so that brick by brick you are able to go for a sturdy construction. Okay. And we'll start today or tomorrow. We'll try to start today itself, Sachin. Few months back, there was a huge volcanic eruption in Hawaii that washed away the whole island. Is there any chance that the question related to volcanic eruptions may come in prelims? Even if they are asked, it will be of very basic nature. It won't be that Mauna Kea or Kilauea, which of them have erupted. It won't be that case. It will be very simple if it is asked. You can have questions from a portion of earthquake as well, for that matter. Odisha government recently prohibited fishing due to olive ridley turtle breeding season and provided compensation to fishers. Does these incidents are important? These are relevant for your mains. You can represent them in the mains examination. But if you come across these news, it is pertinent for you to understand what is the requirement of olive ridley turtle for breeding. What is aribada? Where is it carried out? In the region of Gahir Matha. Other than Gahir Matha, where is it carried out? So that is something you should be aware of. And goldfish has been made a state fish of Gujarat. So these things obviously will be the part of current affairs. That is good, Anurag. Mainam, if I read the PPTs well and make them as my, do I need to read books? You can go through them. Eventually, just for your mental satisfaction, you can flip through them. Any new portions that you come across, fair enough, go through them. But I would suggest to you that these, along with current affairs, are more than sufficient. Samson, absolutely yes. Just revise and be regular from now on. It takes a lot of time to finish one monthly magazine, almost 2 weeks. That is a lot of time. Ideally, yes, current affairs magazine is 100 plus pages, as it should be. Ideally, you should be able to complete the entire monthly magazine in around 3 to 4 days at max. That should be the time taken. 3 to 4 days, at max 5 days, not more than that. Cover 2 of the topics, for example, polity, governance, international relations, economy at one go. Then cover art and culture, etc. in one go. So that is where cover it in 4 days. You have to spend 2 days to revise as well. Okay. So with that, let us initiate the discussion. So in these 10 modules, the first module we are going to discuss is about the ecosystem and the aspect of ecosystem. What do we understand by an ecosystem? And also the details about it. What are the various different factors or components of an ecosystem? We are going to cover about in this particular module what are abiotic factors, biotic factors, what is migration, why do the species do that, what happens when species in the same area they basically interact with each other, and understand environment is a study of biosphere. What is biosphere? Biosphere is consisting of all the various living beings on the planet. So biosphere eventually can be viewed as a kind of a sum total of the influence of the land that we live in, that is the lithosphere, because depending upon the nature of the land, whether you have a rocky area, whether you have a desert area, whether you have a fertile soil in a region, whether you have a plateau area, mountainous area, you will have different kind of species. You will have different kind of vegetation. And different kind of vegetation means different types of animals will live there. So the factor of lithosphere, the influence of climate, atmosphere, and the influence of the water around us, that is hydrosphere. All of these together help us understand biosphere. So this particular subject is nothing but the study of biosphere and how human actions overall are going to impact the biosphere both in the short run as well as in the long run. So in order to conserve that, you have certain international agreements which have been arrived at. You have certain protocols which have been arrived at. That is again something we will cover if we know the basics about the biosphere. Now, when we talk about the entirety of the order of the organization, here you have to understand that you have these individual species, individual, for example, an individual animal, individual plant. Now, a group of them, they make the population of that particular species. Now, a few population of certain species, they make up a community. When many such communities are able to survive in a region, they are able to call it their home. That is an ecosystem. And then multiple of these ecosystems, they make up a biome. And multiple of these biomes, for example, desert is a biome, right? For example, when you consider a mountainous area, there also you can refer to it as a biome. So you have multiple different types of biomes based on climatic classification, which we shall be covering tomorrow. Then all these biomes, many of these biomes end up together making the biosphere. So that is what we are going to study. We are going to study the ecosystem. We are going to study the biome, and that will give us an idea about the biosphere also. So first of all, when we talk about ecosystem, what is the ecosystem? So the living community of plants and animals in any area, together with the non-living components of environment such as soil, air, water, all of that constitutes the ecosystem. Ecosystem, the region or the support system which is important for our survival. Right? Ecosystem is a word oftentimes used in the English parlance also. He had the perfect ecosystem where he could basically find his or her own talent. What does that mean? The surroundings around that individual would have been conducive, right? That individual organization has developed its own ecosystem around it. What does that mean? The support setup, the support system. So for any individual species, you need to have that support system in order to support your survival. For example, let us take the case of one of the most elusive species, very hard to spot, that is the snow leopard. Snow leopard, very difficult to spot. It is basically found to be present in the high altitude region of Himalayas, in the snow covered peaks, etc. Now that snow leopard is able to survive there because of the ecosystem. Snow leopard has got a very thick coat of fur. So it is able to survive there because of the low temperature, and the fur helps it keep itself warm. If there would not have been the presence of other species such as ibex and mountain goats, they would not get the availability of food. right? So you have the living species also which are able to support the snow leopard. You have the temperature conditions, the terrain also which is able to support. That is when the population of snow leopard will be able to grow, will be able to feel comfortable. Understand, out there in the nature, any species, whenever they start feeling comfortable in their surrounding, that is when they multiply. So that is where you will observe the increase in their population also. And whenever the surrounding ecosystem doesn't become very conducive, for example, uh, or simply whenever the surrounding systems are not very helpful, that is where the population starts to decline. For example, when we talk about tigers, now tiger population in India has been increasing, but that does not take away from the fact that in certain pockets the tiger population has reduced. Now, what do tigers require? Tigers, they need that prey. For example, if in a region you have a lot of deer population, tigers will be happy to live there. But how will the deer survive? Deers, they cannot keep on living their life that eventually, maybe if God is kind to me, one day one tiger will spot me and will eat me and my life's purpose will be fulfilled. No. Deers also have their own set of requirement. What is their requirement? Availability of shrubs, grasses, which can be utilized as food, right? So that means wherever you have the availability of grasses, shrubs, etc., you will have tiger population there also, because that will support the herbivore, which will be able to support the tigers next. But if, let's suppose, you go for construction in that area, you carry out construction, so you are hampering that support system. Maybe the grasses, the shrubs will be taken away, so the herbivore population will decline. Once the herbivore population will decline, tigers automatically will decline. For example, in certain regions of Madhya Pradesh this year, what was found out while carrying out the tiger census and the population count, it was found out that you have an invasive species of Lantana camara. It is a kind of a bush which is now found almost in every part of the country, where you have very uniquely colored flowers, different colored pattern flowers, which are very small, which appear in bunch. Almost all of you would have seen and played with it at some point of time in your life or the other. It was found out that in Madhya Pradesh, because you have sudden boom in the population of Lantana camara, the herbivores, they do not get enough food because they don't feed on that plant. So because of that, the herbivore population is declining. Because of that, the tiger population is declining. So all in all, both the living components and the non-living components, if either of them, they're not conducive to you, the ecosystem is not conducive. And that is when the species, they get hampered. So when we talk about the components of ecosystem, overall, you have two particular components. It can be divided into two parts. You have the biotic factors in an ecosystem, biotic factors of an ecosystem, and abiotic factors. What are abiotic factors? The non-biological factors, the non-living factors in an ecosystem, which determines what kind of species will be able to survive there. So amongst the abiotic factors, you have factors such as light, availability of light, very essential in determining the kind of species. For example, at the bottom of the ocean, you don't have any light which is available. So obviously, you won't have the type of marine plants that you witness in the coastal areas. So when you don't have those kind of species, the animals in those areas will also be very different. The benthic species will have very different characteristics. So light is an important factor. Other than light, for example, availability of water. Okay. Then soil conditions. Then temperature. Okay. If the temperature varies, for example, in Greenland, can we expect a mango tree to be present in Greenland? No. Can we expect elephants to be roaming in the region around Antarctica? No. Why? Abiotic factors. They are not conducive enough. Right. So these abiotic factors have also, over a period of past, as we will discuss later on, over a period of past few years or past few millions of years, they have shaped the life that we see on the planet also. Right. Then you have the biotic factors. What are biotic factors? So here, in any ecosystem, you need the producers. These are the living components which influence your surrounding. As a species, what is it that I require for living and for survival? Though living components in an ecosystem, they are the biotic factors, so producers. Unless and until you don't have plants, can we have herbivore population surviving? Obviously not. If we don't have herbivore population surviving, what will the carnivores such as lions and tigers, what will they have? Will they start going on a vegan diet from next day? No. Will they start eating fruits from the next day? That the mango season is there, we will not eat deer, we will eat mangoes now. Will that be the case? No. So producer community is absolutely important, because that ends up providing the basic organic material and the source of energy which sustains the entire ecosystem overall. Right. Now, producer is also of various types. We will come to it, that you have few of the producers, generally majority of the producers, which are able to synthesize light and then produce food. For example, the plants, when they carry out photosynthesis, if there would not have been any light available, how would they have managed to carry out photosynthesis? Then you have consumers. Consumers are of different types. For example, plants have produced food. You have some species who will consume plants only. Now, you have certain species which will eat the herbivores. You have certain species which can have both the herbivores as well as the plants also. You can have certain species which will feed upon only the dead and decaying matter. So that is where the consumers, they are basically classified into various types. That is, you have the herbivores, or simply primary consumers, consumer, which gains food directly from the producer. That is the primary consumer, the first consumer, where they will directly consume the plants. Then you will have secondary consumers, which will eat up the primary ones. Secondary consumer. Then you have tertiary, quaternary, and so on. It goes on. Right? And so on. And then you also have the decomposers. So, for example, out there in the forest, out there in the natural condition, mankind, basically, we have come on this planet very recently, haven't we? Our genesis, even if we talk about the various exaggerated forms of evolution, mankind's genesis cannot be traced beyond 5 lakh years or half a million years. But the various species on the planet have survived for millions of years. Now, out there in the nature, how is it that the soil fertility is retained? Or how is it that the plant growth is retained? For example, let's suppose an elephant dies out in the wild, right? Now, immediately, you will have certain scavengers such as vultures, etc., which will come to feed upon the dead flesh. Within a couple of days, within 3 to 4 days, they will consume the entire flesh associated. That is the first stage of decomposition. Then after, as this is being carried out, you have the various different nutrients, the various different fluids, etc., which are present in the elephant's body. that starts seeping into the soil. Over a period of time, that will make the soil fertile. Then you will have microbes which start working on the remaining flesh, on the remaining organic matter. Now, within a few days, maybe a couple of weeks or so, what was an elephant will be reduced to some organic matter that you cannot even distinguish unless and until you take a look at the bones. Then after a few days, you will find that the entire organic content being worked by these particular organisms, that turns into a soil-like condition. So that is how eventually it will be returned to the ground with the help of these decomposers. And maybe an year after that, or maybe even few months after that, you might have the germination of a new plant species there because the soil has been made fertile by the decomposers. So that is where the availability of producers, consumers, and decomposers, all of them are pertinently important in order to sustain the survivability of species. All of them have their own role to play. So let us familiarize ourselves to these. Starting with the biotic factors, we start with the producers. Now the producers, they are also known as autotrophs. Consumers are known as heterotrophs. Producers are known as autotrophs. Autotrophs means what? Ability to prepare your own food, right? The species who have the ability to prepare their own food. Now understand, does not mean, again I say, many of you get confused in this, that I also prepare my own food every day, morning and evening. I have to prepare my own food. I am a student, so this is my problem. No, cooking the food does not mean preparing your own food, right? Generation of your own food, producing your own food. Now that is what puts the species under the category of autotrophs. Now you have two types of autotrophs, photoautotrophs and chemoautotrophs. As the name suggests, photoautotrophs, they utilize the availability of light in order to produce food. Light as an energy source is utilized here, right? And then chemoautotrophs, they utilize the chemicals present in their surrounding to manufacture food. The first species, as it is said, when we talk about the origin of life, the genesis of life on the planet Earth, I hope we are aware that one of the first species which is said to have come into existence is basically the small cyanobacteria or blue-green bacterium in the oceans. Now, they would produce energy and their own food by utilizing the carbon dioxide as dissolved in the oceans. So they would basically utilize the chemicals around them and then produce that food. So that is why these are your chemoautotrophs. So let us take a look at these photoautotrophs. Bulk of the overall organic content and the energy source produced in the world is by photoautotrophs. That is, the plants, their ability to manufacture their own food with the help of the process of photosynthesis. Now, the plants carry out photosynthesis how? You have the availability of light. With that light, and along with carbon dioxide and water, you have the process of photosynthesis which is carried out where the food is produced by the plant, energy is produced by the plant. But when we talk about the sunlight, we do know that sunlight has got a lot of various different wavelengths of different spectrum available. Now, all of that is not utilized by the plant to carry out photosynthesis. The plants utilize only some portion, the visible portion, majorly visible portion of the sunlight. Now, that is the portion of the wavelength utilized by the plants. That is also what is referred to as PAR, or photosynthetic active radiation. This is basically the wavelengths or the light emitted by the sun is utilizable by the plants only for certain wavelengths. So, for example, ultraviolet, ultraviolet rays not utilized by the plants, infrared rays not utilized by the plants. So, only in this particular spectrum, that is the light source which is utilized. Now, these plants, they carry out the process of production. They produce the organic components, right? So they eventually carry out the process of production overall across the world. All the various different plants, they produce the organic component, and eventually that is utilized by the consumers, decomposers, etc. So that brings us to the concept of productivity. So when we talk about productivity, because these are, whenever you have producers, there will be productivity, right? So the total amount of organic component which is produced by these producers, that is referred to as gross primary productivity, or GPP. So GPP, basically here, gross primary productivity. That is the total organic component produced by autotrophs. Right? The total amount of organic component that is produced, that will be utilized for by consumers also, decomposers also. But you have to understand another concept. The fact is, let's suppose the plants, they produce 100 units of organic matter, let's suppose. Now, is it all available for the outside world only? The plants will require some amount of energy for their own metabolism also. They would require some amount of energy in order to carry out respiration also. I hope we are aware that it is during the nights where the plants carry out respiration, where they take in oxygen and produce carbon dioxide. During the day, when the photosynthesis is carried out, they take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen as a result. During the night, when respiration is carried out, they take in oxygen and produce carbon dioxide. But in order to carry out this respiration, they need some energy. In order to carry out their body metabolism, they need some energy. In order to transfer the kind of energy or water and nutrients from the roots all the way up to the various different nodes of the plants, they require some energy. So all the plants and the autotrophs, they will consume some amount of the productivity in order to carry out processes such as respiration. So that part of productivity is, or that part of the organic produce is not available for the outside world, right? It is utilized by the plants themselves in order to carry out their process such as respiration. So for the outside world, what is available? Whatever has been produced under GPP, gross primary productivity, minus the energy utilized for respiration. And that is what is considered as net primary productivity. That is available for the outside world. So here, when we talk about GPP here, that is your gross primary productivity. But the net primary productivity, or NPP, here, the net primary productivity is GPP minus respiration, energy required for respiration. This is the one available for the outside world. For outside world. Okay. So that is the case of productivity, which is produced by the autotrophs. Now we have taken a look at photoautotrophs, but you also have chemoautotrophs. Chemoautotrophs are the ones which utilize the chemicals around them. The photoautotrophs, they would utilize the sunlight. That is why, and if sunlight would not be present, the plants would never have been able to manufacture their food. So with the availability of sunlight, they manufacture the food, hence photoautotrophs. You have species mostly into the category of single-celled microorganisms, which are able to synthesize the chemicals around them, or oxidize the chemicals around them, and thereby they synthesize or produce energy. Generally, you will have these species which are found in those areas where sunlight is not available. For example, the deepest depths of the oceans, the oceanic trenches in certain cases, underneath the soil where sunlight is not able to penetrate. There you will find such species to be able to thrive. So how do they work is basically carry on the oxidation of chemicals present around to produce energy. Amongst the first of the kind of species which ever originated on planet Earth, they were chemoautotrophs. The blue-green bacterium or the cyanobacterium, they were amongst the first such species which were basically introduced. So these are your chemoautotrophs, Nitrosomonas, Nitrobacter, example of them. Then when we talk about consumers or heterotrophs, consumers or heterotrophs can be of various different types: herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, detritivores. Herbivores are whom? Who feed only on plants. Carnivores, who feed only on animals or various different other species. Omnivores, which can consume both plants as well as animal species. And then you have detritivores. Detritivores, they feed on dead matter, dead and decaying matter. That is what they feed upon, right? So feed on dead matter of plants and animals. Okay, example. Can we have an example of a detritivore? Are we aware of any species which basically will feed on the dead plants and animals? Very good. Shalu, I think you are trying to write vulture, but you have written sculpture. Yes, earthworms, vultures, etc. Yes. Scavengers is the scavengers, detritivores, they are referred to as scavengers themselves. So here you can take the example of vultures. Even cockroaches for some matter, yes. So these basically, they feed on the dead remains of plants and animals. So they are equally important to maintain the ecological balance. Right? Now consumers, they are defined as the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary consumer based upon what is their place in the food chain. I hope we are aware of the food chain. Food chain basically is the entire pathway for the gain of energy. That is, from the very base, how you gain energy. You have the plants, they are the producers. Then, if let's suppose deer consumes those plants, they will be the primary consumers. Let's suppose the tigers consume the deer, they will be the secondary consumers. Right? Let's suppose the parasites, they feed on the tiger, tertiary ones. So it depends. I will show you the food chain and food web in detail later on as well. Yes, Kaustubh, that is correct. Now, then we come to decomposers. We have seen producers, we have seen consumers, and now we see decomposers. Now, decomposers, they are the ones which tend to return the nutrients and help in nutrient cycling across the planet. They help to retain the organic matter back into the soil condition. Now, the process of decomposition, there, it has got multiple different stages. When we see, and this is something that you would have experienced in your own, with your own eyes. You would have seen a food going to waste, right? Sometime or the other in your life, it must have happened, I'm sure, unless and until you are that ideal kid in the world who basically is walking on the footsteps of Mahatma Gandhi, which I'm sure many of you are not. So unless and until you are that kind, you would have had certain scenario where in a box you would have left some food, and only to discover after a few days that it is no longer food anymore. It is basically turned into some kind of a gooey organic content. Or if, let's suppose, you have not been exposed to that reality of life, step outside your house, visit the nearest garbage dumping ground. There you will be able to observe decomposition firsthand. So decomposition is a process that has got multiple different stages. Yes, lunchbox is what I wanted to get at, but I think many of you will get offended that my lunchbox has never been spoiled. But I hope you understand the picture, larger picture. Decomposition has got various different stages associated. It has got the 5 different stages. What are the 5 stages of decomposition? First of all, you have fragmentation, then you have leaching, then you have catabolism, then you have humification, and then you have mineralization. So these are your 5 stages in which decomposition is carried out, right? 5 different stages in which you are able to carry out decomposition. Now, it is not as if, for example, a food that you leave out or a dead animal or a dead plant, immediately it will be returned into the soil. No. First of all, that dead plant or that dead organic matter, it will be broken into many small pieces, multiple small pieces, with the help of various different insects, worms, maggots, earthworms, etc. It will be, and even the scavengers for that matter, they will break that organic matter into multiple smaller pieces. Yes, vultures also. Vultures, basically what they do, they break down that dead animal into many small pieces by consuming them, right? So that complex organic structure is broken down. That is fragmentation. To fragment is to break it down. So here, worked upon by scavengers to break organic matter into smaller subparts. Example, earthworm. That is basically fragmentation. Hawks generally, they feed on they like to have that predator prey kind of a concept where they hunt certain species also, right? So hawks generally, they will be after those living species generally. When we talk about, let's suppose, an organic component, an organic matter which has been broken down, after that, all the bodily fluids, all the nutrients which are present, they will start seeping down and they will be absorbed by the soil around. That is a process which is referred to as leaching, right? That is a process which are referred to as leaching. So in the process of leaching, body fluids and nutrients are absorbed by soil. So in that case, when they are and as they are absorbed by the soil, what will happen? The organic matter will further reduce in size. Whatever was the liquid component has been absorbed by the soil. For example, let's suppose if you are, in case you are unable to relate to this process of leaching or unable to imagine this process of leaching, try to associate it with the nearest or the closest garbage dump that you have seen in your urban area. Or try to associate it with that memory where you might have left some food out in the open for some time. Now, after some time, you will observe, initially it will be broken down by fungus, fungi, etc. After some time, you will observe that there will be some fluid around, liquid around which accumulates. Even in your urban area, even in your urban locality, as that waste is then taken by the municipality, there is significant amount of fluid which is left behind. Where did that fluid come from? It is basically those organic components which will be worked by the microbes, and these microbes will release those fluids from the body of that organic matter, which will start seeping down. That is the process of decomposition, that is leaching, right? After this, the organic component is still some identification you can have that, okay, there is some organic component there. That is when the microbes, that is the bacterium, the fungi, etc., they start working upon them with the help of their enzymes that they secrete. They start further degrading that whatever left organic component is there. So that is catabolism. Okay, so this is where microbes like bacteria further break down or digest the organic component to form or by secretion of enzymes. So by the stage that this process is carried out, furthermore, more decomposition has happened, more degradation has been carried out, isn't it? So that is basically catabolism. By this point of time, what was a dead animal or a dead species is barely recognizable anymore. It has been broken down into multiple smaller parts. All the bodily nutrients, etc., they have been taken away, right? Some of the organic matter which is left is already being worked upon by the bacterium and the various different microbes. So it is not identifiable anymore that what this organic matter is, but there's a lump of organic content howsoever. Then comes the process of humification, where that organic matter still being worked upon by the microbes, it is converted from whatever organic component it was into a kind of a dark brown amorphous kind of a substance. Amorphous means which can change shape. So you have that dark brown soil like formation, and that is so rich in organic component. It is nutritious for the plant growth as well. We call that organic matter as humus. So in this stage, after all the catabolism, etc., has been completed, the microbes and the organisms, they finally work upon it to convert that organic matter into humus. Humus is the organic component of the soil. It is generally dark brownish in appearance. It will have very small particle size. It will be different in appearance than the normal soil condition. And that is very important. That humus is very important for maintaining the soil fertility, for supporting the plant growth. Wherever you have, whichever soil type has got good humus content, the plant growth, the crop growth will be tremendous in that area. So that is when here, when we talk about it, the microbes work upon the organic matter, the remaining organic matter to convert it into dark brown amorphous material known as humus. Very essential for soil fertility. Very, very much essential for retention and maintenance of the fertility of soil. So, whichever soil has got a good humus content, that soil is said to be very productive. And then the last stage of decomposition is mineralization. What is this mineralization? In this, whatever remaining organic component, because humus also has organic component, so this can further, wherever organic component is there, maybe some bacteria can consume it, maybe some microbe will consume it and will convert it into nitrogen, carbon, etc., the basic elementary materials. So here, in that phase of mineralization, what is carried out is basically, even that humus is worked upon by the microbes and the various species, and it is returned as individual nutrients into the soil. Now you don't have any organic matter which is left anymore. All that organic matter has been worked upon, and whatever nutrients were there, let's say carbohydrates, now that will be returned as water, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Let's suppose ammonia was present in the organic component. It will be returned as nitrogen and hydrogen back into the system or the ecosystem. So in the final phase of mineralization, you don't have any organic component left anymore. So when that mineralization is occurring, even that humus is worked upon, right? Humus, all the organic component is worked upon and returned as nutrients back into the soil as individual compounds such as nitrogen, carbon, etc. After this stage, no organic component is found in the soil. That is the process of mineralization. So when a process of mineralization is carried out, when that process of mineralization is complete, we say that the entire process of decomposition is complete. And after that, you don't have many organic nutrients or organic compounds which are left in the soil. You have individual nitrogen, oxygen, etc. So at the end process of decomposition, will there be organic component in the soil? No. At the end of humification, will there be organic component in the soil? Yes. Okay. So with this, we take a look at the kind of decomposition, the rate of decomposition to be carried out in different parts of the planet, different areas depending upon the climate, what is the requirement of decomposition. And we'll also arrive at a question which was framed in this year's prelims. All of you who are panicking by the questions of the prelims, I am here to argue that even the basic information that you cover in the PPT, that can be sufficient to solve many of the questions in the prelims. But we take a break before that, and then we continue. How the crude oil was formed. Just in the crude oil has been formed by the decomposition of the marine species, the marine animals. When you had those deposits, on top of that, you had multiple other sedimentary deposits, etc. So the dead species, their deposition, that was compressed, heavily metamorphosed, and over a period of many millions of years, that got converted into crude oil and the natural gas. Okay, so we take a break. Nagentran, vulture is an example because of organic matters like in agricultural land where you see that dead plants, their branches, all that is basically laid off somewhere or dumped somewhere. It is in order to accelerate that process of decomposition, because once they will get decomposed, all that organic matter can get converted into humus, which will add fertility to the soil. And Muni, chemoautotrophs, basically, when we talk about chemoautotrophs, these utilize the chemicals which are present around them, generally microscopic organisms, so which will utilize the chemicals around them in order to synthesize the energy and the food. Okay. Catabolism and humification look similar, but then humification is the final degradation of the or one of the final degradation of the organic matter, where it is not identifiable as organic matter at all. It is basically very similar to that of a soil in terms of its appearance. Indoor plants are chemotrophs? No. Indoor plants. So how do plants produce food? Can plants produce food without photosynthesis? No. What is photosynthesis? Photo, light, synthesis, utilization. So utilization of light. Indoor plants, they are able to carry out photosynthesis in less availability of light also. Okay. And ecosystem and biosphere. Shalu, as I already told you, that multiple of these ecosystems, they will make up a biome, right? Multiple of these biomes, they will make up a biosphere. Biosphere, when we talk about biosphere, it includes all the living species across the entirety of the planet. Plants, animals, microbes, all of them, that constitutes the biosphere. Ecosystem is at a very small level, where you talk about the surroundings which support an organism. Okay, right? Now, after this, when we talk about decomposition, conditions required for decomposition. Conditions required. So when we talk about the conditions required for decomposition, there are certain conditions which are absolutely a must. For example, for the process of decomposition to happen, you need the availability of air or oxygen so that these microbes can carry out their process. That is why you will also find that if you store certain older food items also in an airtight container, they don't go bad, right? Because the availability of oxygen is controlled there. So there, first of all, you need the availability of air and oxygen. Availability of oxygen. Then after that, if you would have seen that, let's suppose you keep a food item or any of the objects in your refrigerator, it stays good for a longer period of time. If you keep the same thing outside, it will spoil within a few moments, right? You would have also come across the fact that high up in the mountains, the bodies they remain preserved for a much longer period of time, for decades altogether. The body remains, they are in gas also. So that means for decomposition to happen, you need a slightly warmer temperature, a slightly higher temperature. Very low temperature doesn't allow decomposition process to take place. So you need availability of warmer temperature. That warmer temperature availability is very much required. Now, other than that, what is required? So you have the presence of some moisture. In very dry conditions, many of these processes will not be carried out. So that is why moisture availability is also one of the prerequisites. So you need availability of moisture also. That is why during rainy season, you will find that the materials they start getting decomposed very quickly. The fungal growth starts happening almost anywhere, everywhere. Why is that? Because of that availability of moisture. So all these things are required, right? So when you have these three things in appropriate proportion, the speed of decomposition is very high. So rate of decomposition is much higher in warm and moist conditions as compared to dry and cold areas. That is why even when preservatives get food, what do? You store it in or you basically stack it in cold storages. Why do you need those cold storages? So that in very low temperature you cannot have that microbial growth which is happening at the same rate. And that is why in those particular cold storages you can have the products which can be safe for a long period of time, which can be preserved for a longer duration. So that is why the rate of decomposition is variable. Now when we talk about, let's suppose, the decomposition being carried out in different parts of the planet, where the rate of decomposition is fastest, in the equatorial regions of the world or in the temperate and cold regions of the world? Where do you think the rate of decomposition is going to be faster? In the equatorial area which receives rainfall on a daily basis or in the temperate and the frigid regions? Very good. Equatorial areas. In the equatorial areas, the rate of decomposition is very fast as compared to other regions of the planet because of the availability of all these factors. Equatorial areas are warm as well. There is a lot of availability of moisture also, and you have availability of air, which is everywhere. So here, hence, the rate of decomposition is much faster in equatorial areas as compared to temperate and cold regions of the planet. Of the planet. Now, if decomposition is carried out at a faster pace and the entire process of decomposition is carried out, the end result of it, if we talk about the end result, will the soil contain organic materials at the end of it? Or will the soil be devoid of organic materials at the end process of decomposition? Excuse me. What do you think? If the entire process of decomposition is carried out, the end result of it, will the soil consist of organic components or will the soil be devoid of organic components? Very good, beautiful. It will be devoid of organic components because the last stage of decomposition is what? Mineralization. At this stage, no organic component is found in the soil. Everything is returned to the ground in the form of inorganic nutrients such as nitrogen, carbon, etc. You don't have carbohydrates, ammonia, etc. These organic compounds are utilized. These organic compounds are already utilized. So at the end stage of decomposition, you don't have organic component in the soil anymore. This is the reason why in equatorial areas, in equatorial rainforest, you will find that the soil is devoid of organic compound, is devoid of humus. Whereas in temperate regions, you will find that the soil is dark brown in nature and it is rich in organic compounds because the complete process of decomposition has not taken place. It is slowly and steadily happening in the temperate areas. That is why the soil does consist of organic component. Whereas in the equatorial areas, because the rate of decomposition is so very fast, that is why the soil is completely devoid of organic component. Right? So yeah, that is why the reason why the organic or the soil in equatorial areas, regions are completely devoid of organic compounds, whereas the temperate regions will have soil rich in humus due to slow rate of decomposition. Okay, this is why the soil in the equatorial areas, they are not fertile. They are almost infertile because immediately everything is decomposed so very quickly because you have so many different types of, for example, reptiles, insects, etc. That all the organic matter will be decomposed very quickly. So the soil will not have humus at all. So the equatorial region, the soil is completely devoid of humus. Whereas in the temperate areas, the soil will be abundantly rich in humus. And this is the question which was asked in UPSC this year in the prelims examination, where you had a statement-based question, where the statement was that why is it that the soil in the equatorial rainforest area, they are devoid of humus or they are infertile. So the answer to that was basically because the rate of decomposition is very fast. I will show you the question tomorrow if possible, so that you can gain an analysis of it. I hope till this portion it is understood. Right? Kamlesh, when we talk about the torrid zone is a very large area in the entire tropics. Within the tropics, you have the equatorial area also. You have the tropical regions also. In the subtropical regions where you have the desert, again that rate of decomposition will be slow because you don't have availability of moisture. Right? And as this process has basically the process eventually as it is completed, heat is produced as a byproduct. Okay, heat is produced as a byproduct at the end stage or during the phases of decomposition. Okay, now, and also gases such as methane, etc., they are released as a byproduct. Devoid means empty, yes, my dear friend. Then why equatorial regions have evergreen forest? That is because of the conditions prevalent. that you have everyday availability of rainfall, availability of heat. So plants will grow. But the soil is not very fertile. The soil lacks nutrients, complete lack of nutrients. That is why even the plant species you will find the various carnivorous plants are to be found in the equatorial areas. For example, when you talk about, let's suppose the various different plants such as the Venus flytrap, etc., they fulfill their requirement of nutrients which is not available in the soil. They fulfill it by trapping the insects, the flies, etc. So that is why you have the various different types of plant species to be found in that area also. Okay, I hope that is understood. Right. Now, after this, we come to the abiotic factors. So when we talk about the abiotic factors, these are the non-living components such as water, air, nutrients, rocks, heat, solar energy, all of that, which shapes up the life in any particular area, which has the influence in altering the life, the type of life, etc. in an area. Okay. You have written rich in humus. It should be rich in organic matter. Yes, both of them. What is humus? What do we understand by humus? Question, let me know, and then we will. After that, I'll help you out. Right. And here, when we talk about the abiotic factors, these are basically those particular factors which influence the type of life, the different varieties of life, etc., which are prevalent. So you have, for example, temperature. Now, temperature is one of the controlling agents, as we have already talked about the fact that you need to have adequate temperature for any particular species to survive in a region. You will not find in the polar areas or in the very cold regions, you won't find the presence of many of the rodents. Right? You won't find many of the reptiles in the frozen areas. Why? Because they will be exposed to very low temperatures. Right. So temperature becomes an important controlling factor. Generally, you will find that the smaller species such as the rodents, etc., not to be found in the polar areas or frigid zones. Why? Because as compared to their body, the size of the body, the surface area is very large and they lose heat very quickly. So that is when they can get frozen to death. That is why you will find various different species adaptable to different climatic conditions. Overall, you'll find that there is a greater species diversity to be found in the tropics of the world as compared to the temperate and frigid zone. Why? Because temperature is consistent and tolerable throughout the year. Now, when we talk about the tolerance of temperature, various different species have different tolerance levels. You have certain species which have a very narrow window of temperature tolerance, and you have certain species which can tolerate wide range of temperature. Generally, under general circumstances, you will find that terrestrial species they have a greater tolerance of temperature. They can tolerate temperature over a wide range. But when we talk about marine species, they have a very little thermal tolerance. Even if the temperature changes by 3 to 4 degrees, that can virtually mean a mass death occurring at the same time in the case of the marine environment. And why is that the case? That is because in the oceans and seas of the world, temperature is largely consistent, does not change suddenly and rapidly. And because the temperature is largely consistent, means what? They have overall evolved in that consistent temperature. Their body has been adapted to suit a consistent temperature. So if there is a sudden departure in temperature, the species they suffer. Right? So accordingly, here when we talk about the thermal tolerance, thermal tolerance. Here, terrestrial species have a greater thermal tolerance as compared to marine species. marine species. As temperature in marine areas do not change suddenly or rapidly. Okay, hence the species are adapted to that consistent temperature. Now there is another sort of minor classification of the species who are able to have very narrow temperature tolerance. They are known as stenothermal, and the species which have a wide thermal tolerance, they are referred to as eurythermal, that they can withstand various different temperature conditions. Also remember, for a kind of a consistent temperature, if present throughout the year, that is always good for the species. Always. If the temperature keeps on changing quite rapidly and quite abruptly in an area, that is never good for the survivability or evolution of species. This is the reason why the species diversity that you find in regions such as Canada or Europe, or for example, parts of US or parts of Central Asia, the species diversity is very less. But the diversity of species that you find, for example, in India, for example, in Indonesia, for example, in the region of Congo, in Africa, in region of Amazon, forest in South America, there the species diversity is much higher. Why? Because across the tropics, the temperature has largely remained consistent for millions of years altogether. Temperature has not changed suddenly. Even during the last ice age, for that matter, you had various different areas closer to the poles. For example, the present day region of northern part of Europe, Western Europe, North America, all of that was completely frozen. Northern and Eastern Asia, all of that was completely frozen during the last ice age. But the tropics, they remained ice free. So that is why you have a greater diversity of species, greater number of species in the tropics as compared to temperate regions of the world, right? So here, greater number of species are to be found in the tropics as compared to temperate regions. And this is because of the fact that here temperature has largely remained consistent through history, past, and through the year. So there is a kind of a predictability in terms of temperature conditions, etc., which is always suitable for the thriving and the reproductive scale of the organisms also. Then after that, another controlling factor, another abiotic factor in the ecosystem is water. Now, please understand, all these small bits that we are covering, for example, thermal tolerance, greater number of species diversity, higher rate of decomposition, from all of these, a prelims questions can be framed. Don't think about it that UPSC will ask you a question, what are the abiotic factors? And in that, it will give you consumers as a trick question. No. UPSC will ask you a question from these areas, and this is how it will basically twist it out, right? That why more diversity in the region of the tropics as compared to temperate areas? Why, and this year it has already asked, why the soil is poor in organic content in the region of equatorial rainforest. So it will always be the derived questions which can be framed and which will be framed from here. So rather than straight away going through that, okay, this is temperature controls the species, I know that, You have to understand the implications of it also. That marine species have a lesser thermal tolerance. Why? Terrestrial species have a greater thermal tolerance. Why? Species of rodents are not found in the polar regions. Why? So all those bits and pieces that we are holding a discussion for, that we are even citing an example for, it is these questions that UPSC is picking nowadays. Okay, so that is where you have to frame your understanding. Okay, now what is temperate areas? Temperate areas basically is the region beyond the tropics, Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, beyond that, up till the region of the Arctic and the Antarctic Circle. That is what is the temperate region. Okay. Tropics also temperature changes as poles have consistent temperature. In the tropics, Shalu, the temperature throughout the year, can we say that temperature throughout the year is always going to be above 10-15 degrees Celsius? We can say that on an average throughout the year, we can say that the average temperature is going to be above 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. Whereas in temperate regions, what do you find? That during the winters, temperature can go to sub-zero also. During the summers, it can increase to 20-25 degree also. So during the winters, when the temperature goes in sub-zero category, will you have the producer community, the plants available? No. The plants won't be producing the organic compounds at the same rate during the winter. Many of the plants won't even survive. So that means a significant lack of availability of food. So only those kind of species will be able to survive in those areas which are able to do with that limited supply of food during the winter. Whereas in tropics, you have availability of food throughout the year, right? That is where you have the better availability of various different sources of food as well, right? So that is why tropics is basically a kind of the region where you have that consistency of temperature. Okay, right? I hope that is understood. Now, after this, the controlling factor of water. Temperate region is otherwise called torrid zone. Absolutely not. Temperate region, it is the tropical region which is referred to as the torrid zone, not the temperate area. When we talk about water, now life, the genesis of life happened underwater, under the ancient oceans. That is when the single-celled organisms, they started coming into existence. Now, when we talk about availability of water, that is very much required. You cannot have those species which require a lot of water to be growing in the dry regions. For example, as a crop, can you grow sugarcane in the western part of Rajasthan? No, it requires a lot of water availability. It will typically be found in those areas where a lot of water is available. For example, rubber as a tree, can you grow it in the desert areas? Absolutely not, because it requires availability of moisture. Similarly, when we talk about the animals also, many of them, they go through large migrations covering hundreds of kilometers in order to have the access to water. So water is very much required to maintain the nutrient balance of your body also. That is very much required. If your body basically gets dehydrated, right, whenever you get dehydrated, rather than filling your body with a lot of water, what is advisable? That take in certain salts or electrolytes. That is advisable. When you faint out in the sun, maybe sometime during the childhood days, you would have fainted out in the sun. You would have felt dizziness out in the sun. What as a remedy is provided to you? Do people start providing you more water? No, they provide you salts so that the body retains that water, right? So that salt balance in the body is also maintained by the availability of water. So basically, here, next to temperature, water is one of the most important factor influencing the life of organisms, and life on Earth originated in water and is unsustainable without it. So based upon the availability of water, you have different types of species which survive in different areas. For example, plants which grow in the desert regions, the availability of water is almost negligible there. So you will find that those plants, they will have their roots which start growing deeper in order to access some water which is present in the subsoil region. Many of those plants are ephemeral in nature. right? Ephemeral in the sense they are extremely seasonal. So if it rains for one day, immediately the next day you will find that the plant will flower, and then after that it will go into the dormant stage again in order to conserve water. So the behavior of the plants, the type of plants, the type of animals that you find, all of that is dependent on water. The adaptations that they carry out is also dependent on water. Okay. Then you have availability of light. We have already discussed that availability of light determines the producer community which lives in an area, which resides in an area. So producer community is very much essential. And producer, by this we mean, here in this reference we are talking about photoautotrophs. It is the photoautotrophs which will utilize light, not the chemoautotrophs. So when we talk about light, so it is utilized by photoautotrophs to produce food. Now the last major extinction, mass extinction which happened, it managed to kill one of the most predominant species to have ever lived on the planet Earth. One of the most dominant species who adapted to various circumstances to have lived on Earth, and those were the dinosaurs. So dinosaurs basically would have survived till this date had there not been a sudden cataclysmic event where an asteroid basically crashed on the surface of the planet. Now you know that the asteroid basically crashed where? In the region of Gulf of Mexico near North America. Dinosaurs were virtually spread across all the various land masses across the world. So when that asteroid struck in the region of North America, in the region of Gulf of Mexico, how come the dinosaurs situated in Africa, why did they go extinct? Why is it that dinosaurs in other areas went extinct? That is because as that asteroid struck, there was so much amount of gas, smoke, and dust particle which was released. Because due to the heat which was produced, immediately lot of the materials, the surface was vaporized because of that high heat produced due to the collision. And lot of smoke, lot of dust particles were emanated. Many of these dust particles, they lingered into the atmosphere for many years to come together. And when they continued to linger in the atmosphere, what happened? Availability of light was something which was distorted. Light was not available with the same intensity. So the plants, they started dying first. And you had limited production from the plants. So when the plants, they could not produce much, those large herbivorous dinosaurs, they started getting the lack of food. They did not have enough food and they started dying. That is where even the dinosaur fossils where they are found, you'll find that many of the young ones with their mother, they are basically found to be dead at the same time. That is clearly indicative of the lack of food, availability of adverse condition. So once you have the light, availability of light which is distorted, the entire production process in the ecosystem in itself gets distorted. And that producer community will have a cascading impact amongst the consumer community, amongst the decomposer community, and the entire ecological balance will come crashing down, right? So that is the role played by this. Then you have the another abiotic factor, that is soil also. So depending upon the nature of the soil, what is the acidity or the pH value of the soil, how thick or thin the soil is, that will also end up determining the type of life that you find in that area, the variety of life that you find in that area, that is also controlled by this. So soil also is a contributing factor. The type of minerals that you find, based upon how that soil has been formed, the amount of nutrients that you find, that basically ends up determining the total number of microorganisms that you find in the soil. So this is also one of the abiotic factors. Now, as these abiotic factors we have seen over a period of time, these abiotic factors have changed multiple times. And even, let's say, during an year, these abiotic factors, they are prone to change. For example, in the region of Siberia, during the winter months, the temperature goes significantly below the freezing point. Everything is covered under ice and snow. The water bodies, there the top layer is covered under ice. In the lower layers, you might have water which is present in liquid form, but the top of the water body is covered under ice. So those particular birds, etc., who feed on those fishes, they don't have availability of food. Why? Because the abiotic factor has changed. So what do? When that abiotic factor has changed, they develop a response to it. So they migrate to countries such as India, where during the winter the temperature is still warm enough in comparison, where they can get access to food. So that is where, when the abiotic factors, they are prone to change, when they start changing, the species, they adapt accordingly, they respond accordingly. Few of the species, they have the capability to adapt or to the changing environmental conditions. For example, we humans, when the temperature becomes very hot, when the temperature increases significantly, how does our body respond? Body starts retaining water. For example, during the summer months, you will observe, you would have experienced, you do not feel the urge to urinate so much. Why? Because your body is trying to retain water, right? And then when you sweat during the summer months, you perspire. Why do you sweat? So that is also another body mechanism where you sweat and that sweat evaporates. That provides the cooling, right? So that is a cooling mechanism of the body. When you talk about elephants, when the temperature goes higher, you'll find the elephants, they start flapping their ears very vigorously. Why do you think the elephants do that? Other than obviously swatting away the flies and the mosquitoes around them, why do you think the elephants, they swat their ears so much? They wave their ears so much? Because in those ears, in those thin ears of elephants, you have a lot of blood vessels and capillaries. So as they move vigorously, that provides cooling. And thereby the blood cools down. That is where the body temperature also comes down. So this is where they are able to tolerate some temperature range. During the winter months, when it is very harshly cold, what do you observe? You start shivering. Why does the body shiver? Because when you shiver, that generates heat. So that is your body's mechanism to deal with the changing abiotic factors. But can a mango tree shiver just like that? No. Can a plant start shivering like that or adapt like that? No. So not all the species have that ability to adapt to the changing abiotic factors. Few of them, they do have. So based upon that, when we talk about the responses to abiotic factors, responses to change in the abiotic factors, you have either the species will regulate their own body in order to tackle those changes, or the species will basically conform to those changes, that okay, these are the changes which have happened, and we will, our body structure will also change. Or the species simply migrate, they go into long sleep. So this is what or how they respond to these changes. So here, when we talk about the responses to abiotic factor, one of the things is regulate. What is regulate? So basically, organisms, they are able to maintain homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis is basically maintenance of your internal fluid and temperature requirements. That's it, right? So if you are able to maintain that. So some species are able to maintain that by thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Thermoregulation, regulation of your internal body temperature by various body mechanisms such as sweating, shivering, etc. You are able to maintain your own body temperature. And osmoregulation, where you are able to retain your fluid balance. For example, in summer, you don't feel the urge to urinate, but in the winter, even if you consume slightest amount of water, you will feel that urge to urinate. So that is again your body retaining the water levels as much as required. So that is where by thermoregulation and osmoregulation, few of the species, they are able to maintain their own body's internal requirement. But not all the species. Plants, for example, don't have that property. Majority of the plants don't have that property. right? So here, when we talk about all birds and mammals and a very few level of lower vertebrates and invertebrate species, they are capable of such thermo and osmoregulation. Thermoregulation, when we talk about it, this is maintenance of internal body temperature. Maintenance of internal body temperature. And when we talk about osmoregulation, it is basically maintenance of internal fluid requirement. Right? That is the basic difference that you have. Okay. So this is the case when the species are able to regulate their own body mechanisms, their own body functionality to adapt to this. Then you have many of the species, such as the category of plants, etc., which conform to the change in the sense that if the outside temperature has dropped significantly, I cannot help but as a plant, my internal temperature will also drop. So the plants will die. Right. So here, an overwhelming majority of animals and nearly all the plants, they cannot maintain a consistent or a constant internal environment. Their body temperature changes with the ambient temperature. So that is where, if the temperature changes quite considerably and quite suddenly, these species are unable to tackle that change, and many of them perish as a result of that. So here, if the abiotic factors change suddenly and in a drastic manner, the plants, these species, are unable to adapt and change accordingly. Okay, that is basically the case of conform. Now, few of the species, they when the abiotic factors change suddenly, they have no other option but to migrate. They move out. As long as the harsh conditions will prevail, they will not be back in that area. For example, the Siberian crane. The name in itself tells you it is from the region of Siberia. Now, the Siberian crane migrates to countries such as India during the winter months. Why? In order to escape the harsh conditions back home. Because once, when you have the conditions which become very harsh, availability of food becomes very scarce. Availability of various other resources becomes almost unavailable. So, where do they go? They go to those areas where you need those or where you have those available resources. That is why many of the species, you'll find majority of the migration which takes place, majority of that takes from the temperate regions or the colder areas to the warmer regions of the planet. Right? But the opposite is also true. For example, many of the species of whales, humpback whales, for example, they will be migrating to cooler areas in order to have the requirement of food, etc. They migrate to cooler areas. So, not all the species they migrate in the same manner. So, along with birds, marine animals, etc., terrestrial animals, they also end up migrating. For example, in the Serengeti region is present in Tanzania, in the region of Africa. It is a vast area of grassland, tropical grassland. Now, in the Serengeti area, every year during the dry season, species of elephants, they go for mass migration. Not only elephants, zebras and other herbivores also, they go for mass migration. In When we talk about zebras and other herbivores, they can oftentimes move in the number of hundreds to areas of greener patches, right? Elephants, they can move for many kilometers, tens and hundreds of kilometers, in order to have access to water. So that is where the species will migrate in order to have better access to resources in areas where the abiotic factors are favorable. Now, majority of the species that migrate are in the category of birds. So these birds, if let's suppose they have to migrate from Siberia to India, so will they straight away simply fly away and okay, whichever path is available, we will take that path, our destination is India? No. They have a fixed pattern of migration, for the birds at least. For all the species, they have a kind of a fixed route of migration that they have been following for generations altogether. In the case of birds, that migratory pathway, these are also known as flyways. In total across the world, you have 8 available flyways. Okay, so here, birds for migration choose or prefer certain fixed paths and that is known as flyways. Across the world, 8 flyways exist, and 3 out of them pass through India. Three of those flyways, they will lie either partially or to some extent, they pass through the region of India. Now, as soon as the conditions become favorable back home, these birds will migrate back. Okay? So that is why, for the conservation of these migratory species, it had been found out over a lot of research, it had been found out that many of these migratory species, while they might be protected in their homes, in their home countries, but when they are migrating, oftentimes they are hunted and shot down. So that is why, in order to have conservation or protection of them, that is why you had the Bonn Convention or the conservation of migratory species, where it was understood, arrived at the fact that you need to protect these species even in the areas where they are migrating to. Otherwise, a species which is migrating from Central Asia to India, you might protect them in Central Asia, but if you kill them in India, that species, their population will decrease. One of the example of such is sociable lapwing. Sociable lapwing is a small bird which comes under the category of being critically endangered. Now, ideally, its home is Central Asia. But then, during the winters, it migrates to wetlands in the region of Gujarat and parts of Western India in order to get that access of food. Now, wetlands being polluted, the availability of food is lessening. Many of these are also hunted down. So their population has been declining considerably. So that is where, for migratory species, you need to conserve them over the entire range of it. Okay? Now, then comes another response, and that is to suspend. Suspend what? Suspend their bodily actions. So let's suppose winter is coming. Suppose the proverbial term that winter is coming, and winter is going to be very harsh. Suppose lack of availability of food, complete lack of availability of food. So in that case, what do? So many of the animals, they go for a long winter sleep, right? Because when you go to sleep, you slow down your body's metabolism rate. You slow down the rate of breathing so that If you slow these processes, if you slow the biological processes down, what happens is you don't need to have that energy intake. So your requirement of food also goes out of the window. So you can go for a long sleep for 3 to 4 months. Again, when the situation or the conditions of the winters they retreat, again, you can be back. Right. So that is where many of the species they go for a prolonged winter sleep. Sometimes they go for a prolonged summer sleep in case the summer is going to be very harsh, lack of availability of water, etc. And some of them they simply suspend their bodily activities as long as the conditions are adverse. So there you have different types, that is hibernation, hibernation, and this is when long winter sleep. So for example, certain species of bears, they go for that hibernation. Now in India, you find brown bear also, you find the Indian sloth bear also. Sloth bear is found in which regions of India? Are we aware of that sloth bear? Sloth bear is found in the region of Nilgiris in southern part of India prominently. Now they don't go for hibernation in general, right? But when we talk about many of the bear species, such as the polar bears, they will go for hibernation because during the starkest of the winter, everything is covered under ice and snow. It will be dark in the polar areas for continuous 5 to 6 months. So it is always advisable to go for long winter sleep. So those species, they go for that hibernation. Then you have other thing, that is estivation. Estivation is when the species, when they sense that, and this is a generational thing. It is not that today one particular bear has decided that, you know what, the condition is not nice, so regardless of whatever everyone else is doing, I will go to sleep. No, this is a generational thing. This goes on in the adaptation of the species themselves, right? That is why the species, generally, for example, certain bear species, even certain species such as certain types of sea lions, etc., seals, etc., which go for that hibernation, you'll find that their body has got that thick fat layer, so that in that entire phase, they will utilize the fat to generate energy which is required. That's it. And with that bare minimum energy, they will be able to survive. Okay. Estivation is when you have long summer sleep. When you go for that prolonged summer sleep in order to escape the harsh summer conditions. This is generally witnessed in the desert areas by few of the rodents. That is where you have estivation. Then you also have diapause. This is where body's metabolism is suspended as long as harsh conditions prevail. Observed in smaller species, microscopic species like planktons. Okay, where the body's own requirement of energy is almost suspended. They live in that condition. We will take, when we talk about extinctions which have happened across the world, various mass extinction, you know, there is one species which has survived all the phases of extinction, where at each different phases of mass extinction, where you had more than 90% of the species which went extinct, you had one species, that is the tardigrade or the water bear, which is very small, that has been able to survive all of them. So what did we humans do? We thought, if the extinctions could not kill it, let us take it to space. It survived that also. It survived deepest of the oceans also. Why? Because it simply is able to suspend all the metabolism. It is as if the body goes into the shutdown phase during that period. And again, when they sense basically that the conditions have turned to normal, again, they basically come back to life. Now, a question that, do we humans, can we go for that hibernation and estivation? No. Regardless of how much you sleep during the day, it is not hibernation. Regardless of how sleepy you feel during the morning, during the evening, it is not hibernation or estivation. It is simply lethargy, right? So that is different matter. So here, now we come to the concept of ecotone. What is that species? That species is tardigrade or water bear. Tardigrade or water bear. This has survived all the phases of mass extinction. I will show you this particular species when we come to the 6th module, when we talk about the various different other mass extinctions. Okay. Now, then we come to the concept of ecotone. What do we understand by ecotone? So an ecosystem, for example, a forest ecosystem, will have its characteristic of dense woody trees, less availability of sunlight on the forest floor, etc. Right? High amount of moisture availability, warm temperature. Then a desert will have its own kind of condition. The desert ecosystem, warm conditions, lack of water, etc. So it won't be the case that till here you have dense forest and from here you have the vast desert which starts. It doesn't happen like this. What do you find? You'll find that initially, in the case of the forest, the density of the trees, they start reducing. Where initially you have very dense tree vegetation, then you have density of trees reduce and you have grasses. Then eventually you have the presence of only grasses, and then that leads to lesser grasses, eventually a desert. So there's a general transition. So that those grasses which are a transition from forest to the desert, they will come under ecotone. So when we talk about an ecotone, it is an area that acts as a boundary or a transition between two ecosystems. So let's suppose you have an ecosystem here. Let's suppose forest. You have an ecosystem here. Let's suppose desert. In between them, this is your ecotone. This will be your grasslands. Right? It is a zone of transition. That is why in these ecotones, you'll find certain species which can adapt to the forest condition also. You'll find certain species which can adapt to dry condition also. And you will find certain new species also. For example, elephants. Now, elephants are those species you don't find in the forest. Elephants as a species you don't find in the desert. But elephants as a species you will find in these grasslands. Isn't it? When I say elephants you don't find in the forest, I mean the densest of the forest. You find elephants in forest, but slightly open forest, where the density of trees is not very high, right? Other than the Sumatran elephant. So in these ecotones, you'll find the species which are adapted to each one of them, and some of the unique species which you find only in that ecotone. So that is why generally ecotones are populated areas. Ecotones generally are those areas where you will find a lot of population. This is what is also known as the edge effect, where being on an edge of an ecosystem, you get both the available conditions, and that is why the number of species will increase. For example, another ecotone example, estuaries. the estuarine region. What are estuaries? Estuaries are those areas where the river water meets the sea, but the sea water comes inland. So let's suppose this is your river, which is draining into the sea. This is the region of your sea. This is as the river flows. Now, this is an example of an ecotone. Why? Because river is going to have fresh water. Sea is going to have saline water. Isn't it? In this region, let's suppose I take you to this point A. If I ask you at A, which water is more dominant, fresh water or saline water? Obviously, you will say that in this region, saline water is more dominant. Why? Because it is closer to the sea, isn't it? But if I ask you at this region B, which will be more dominant, fresh water or saline water? What do you think? Obviously, fresh water, because that is much more connected to the river. Here, if I ask you, you'll find a kind of a mixture of both of them. So, at B, you'll find those species in number which are more adapted to fresh water, but those species will also be able to survive there, which like saline water. At A, you'll find predominantly those species which are able to survive in saline water, but some of them which are even able to tolerate the fresh water, right? So that is why in these ecotones, generally you will find greater population. That is your edge effect, right? Now, examples of ecotones, you have marshlands, right? Marshy areas, which are a kind of a transition between very dry regions and very moist areas. Then you have mangrove forest between the terrestrial, because many of these forest mangrove trees, they are existent in submerged conditions, so they are also to be found in these areas. Grasslands between desert and forest, estuaries between salt water and fresh water. Even mountain ranges, they also create an ecotone, because they, from the top of the mountain to the foothills, you come across a variety of different conditions, so they also represent a kind of a transition. Now these ecotones, they can, by the way, be natural, they can be man-made also. Okay, for example, when we talk about agricultural field, many of the times it serves as an ecotone from the forested area, a transition. That is why you will find increased amount of animal interference, increased amount of elephant incursions in the agricultural field close to the forest. And we think about it that the animals have invaded our homes. No, you have basically constructed an ecotone for them. You have basically triggered a kind of a different ecosystem for them. That is why you will find those animals there, right? So wherever you have these agricultural lands created near the forest, for example, Odisha, for example, Kerala, for example, Karnataka, for example, Tamil Nadu, in all these areas, you will find frequent incursions by the Assam, another one of those. Frequent incursions by the elephants taking place, right? So ecotones can be wide or narrow. It could contain species that are entirely different from the ones that are found in the ecosystems, individual ecosystems. For example, in the forested ecosystem, you'll find a lot of species of monkeys and apes. But when you talk about grasslands, you won't find them in existence, right? Similarly, in deserts, you'll find various species of cacti, cactus. But when we talk about the grasslands, you don't find them. So it can have very different species, and some of the species which can tolerate both of them. It can be natural or man-made. For example, ecotone between agricultural field and a forest is a man-made ecotone. Now we come to the portion of edge effect. As I told you, generally, there is a change in population structure in the boundary of these two ecosystems or habitats. Generally, there is a greater number of species found in ecotones, and that is called as edge effect. Those species that you find in these uniquely in these ecotones itself, they are also known as edge species. Example, elephants. Elephants in grasslands. Okay, that is an example of the edge effect. Now, after that, we introduce ourselves to another set of basic fundamental features, and that is what is a habitat, and then we'll take a look at what is a niche. So, for any species, you require a habitat. Habitat, habitable area where they can survive, where they can live. Now, for example, when we talk about any particular species there, so an elephant will require a certain temperature condition, a certain ground condition. Elephants cannot survive on top of the mountains, can they? Elephants won't be able to survive in very rocky terrains, would they? So they require certain conditions. So those non-living conditions, which end up shaping the habitable space of an organism, that is a habitat. Habitat generally talks about the type of, let's suppose, the temperature conditions, water conditions, ground conditions, etc., which is required for the utmost and the well-maintained survivability of the species. Right? So you have, even habitat is a word which is used for in everyday common English parlance as well, that we need to establish a human habitat in order to survive there. So you need to establish a perfect living condition, right? So the area where an animal lives or its home, usually an ecosystem or an area within an ecosystem, is a habitat. It relates mostly to non-living physical or chemical conditions of an area, such as temperature, rainfall, salinity, sunlight, soil, elevation. These are basically the factors which will influence the living conditions. So the suitable living conditions for an organism, that is the habitat. Okay? But then, let's suppose in a particular area, I have, that is a region where I know the temperature required by the elephants is close to around 24, 25. They are comfortable in that. I take the temperature to that range. And in an area, I provide, let's suppose, availability of water also. But there are no grasses, no green shoots, etc. Can the elephant survive there? No, because they need those grasses for the availability of food. Because the elephants, they are primary consumers, they will consume those producers. So, each and every organism has got a biological functionality which allows them to survive. For example, the tigers cannot survive unless and until you have a high number of herbivores present. The herbivores, their population is kept in check by the tiger, the lion population out there, by the carnivore. So each of the species out there in the nature, they have their own functional biological role also, which is ascribed in that larger ecosystem. So that functional biological role of a species is a niche. It is not niche, it is not Nikkei, it is niche. When we talk about niche, so a species niche is composed of its habitat plus the biological or living things found in the habitat, which is important for its survivability, which is important for its existence. Right? So when we say a species has got, the grassland is its niche area, so that is where it has got that requirement. Okay, so the living component of a habitat, that is a community. Biological factors include location on the food chain, in which is it a primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer? What is its functional role in the biodiversity? Predator-prey relationship or the reproductive requirements, all of them, right? Interrelationships and interactions, they are basically the important aspect of a niche. Now, a niche can be generalized, a niche can be specialized. What do we mean by that? Generalized niche. For example, if in a tropical area grasslands are available, herbivores can thrive. So, be it the grasslands in Madhya Pradesh, be it the grasslands in Karnataka, different type of grasses in somewhere, different type of grasses somewhere else. Maybe the deers can survive everywhere. So that is a generalized niche. But you have certain species, for example, dugong. Dugong is a marine herbivore mammal. Now, dugong basically will consume only the marine plants. Now, in the marine areas, in the sea and the oceans, where will you find plants? In the coastal areas, where the depth is very shallow, where the sunlight is available. Now, those dugongs, they will be able to survive only in those areas. So that means they will be present across the coastal regions. Now, across these coastal areas, if you carry out construction, their habitat will be disturbed, their niche will be disturbed. So that is a specialized niche. They can exist only in certain conditions. So those species which have specialized niche, they are much more in the threat of extinction, because immediately if the conditions go haywire, they won't be able to survive out of it. Right? So that is why when we have these specialized niche, they apply to species which have very well defined or a narrow physical, biological, or chemical requirements for survival. So this is your dugong. In India, where do you find them? In India, around the region of Great Nicobar, you find a lot of these dugong, and also few of them around the area of Pork Strait. Right? So the Gulf of Mannar Biosphere Reserve, as well as the region of Great Nicobar, you find this dugong. These are your marine herbivore mammals. Herbivore mammals. Now, those species which have a specialized niche, generally they find adaptation very difficult, and these are the species which are pushed to extinction very, very quickly. Okay. Then, this is your basic difference. So, habitat, a place or a part of an ecosystem occupied by a particular organism. When we talk about a niche, the role of an organism within its environment or ecosystem. Habitat is a physical place. Niche is a function or an activity, the functional role that an organism plays. Reflects the living place of an organism. It reflects the biotic and abiotic association that an organism has with the living space, including the type of food, content, material, diet, reproduction, and other activities that is included when we talk about niche. Okay? Now, then we come across the aspect of population interaction. What do we mean by this? So, when in a region, in an area, when you have multiple species which will survive in an area, which will live in an area, they will have interaction with each other. They will have interference in certain matters. Now, these species, either one of them will basically feed on the other. So there will be the predator-prey relationship. For example, a tiger and a deer, they will share almost a similar ecosystem, but the tiger will consume the deer. Right? So predator-prey. Or it can be the case where both of them mutually benefit each other by their existence. Right? For example, lichens, for example, corals, where you can have both the species, multiple species benefiting each other. It can be commensalism, amensalism, and so on. So these are the various ways in which the populations of the species, they will interact with each other when they share the same space. So that is the case of population interaction. Niche, I am unable to understand. Understand, when we talk about any particular species, such as take the example of tigers, or take the example, yes, tigers, let's go with the example of tigers. Now they have a requirement for living also, that they will survive in this much temperature, this much moisture content, etc. So that defines the habitat. But if, let's suppose, there is no herbivore population, can the tiger survive in any area? They won't get food, isn't it? So there is a biological requirement of herbivores which makes the tiger survive. So that is where the niche of tigers would be those warmer areas where you have lot of herbivore population. That will be its ecological niche. When we talk about, let's suppose, elephants, they require warm temperature, etc., land area, etc. But if you don't have enough plants, will they be able to survive? No. So the niche of that elephant will be the kind of warm conditions, etc., along with the availability of grassland. So that is where, when we talk about niche, it is the exact biotic along with the abiotic factors which allows the species to not only survive but to thrive and reproduce also. I hope that is understood. Savanna will come under the category of ecotone. Yes, they it will. Okay. And niche is related to food as well as both the habitat, the food requirement as well as the living conditions. Considering thermal tolerance, does it mean that the thermocline region in ocean is not habitable? Absolutely not. Even that region of thermocline will be habitable, because there also you will have some temperature. Let's say at a depth of 400 degrees or 400 meters, where the thermocline begins. After 100 meters, there also you will have a temperature. It might be very low as compared to the surface, but it will be a temperature. So you will have species which are adapted to that. Okay. Now, edge effect is basically when you have in the region of the ecotones, you have a larger population which lives there, because you can have species of both the ecosystems along with the unique species to be found in the ecotone. So that is why generally in the ecotones, when you have a larger population, that is known as the edge effect. Okay, right. Niche, Anurag, is the requirement of both availability of biotic and abiotic factors which allows the species to survive and thrive. Biotic factors means the producers also. Biotic factors means the consumers also, detritivores also, decomposers also. So when we talk about grassland, there you have the adequate producer community which will fulfill the requirement of the elephant. That is why. Okay. Now, population require, yes, Santosh, you can say that. So population interactions, when in the same region, different species they are able to survive, how do they interact with each other? So either you have the condition of predation. What is predation? Predation is where you have a predator and a prey, right? For example, lion is a predator, deer is a prey, right? So predator will consume the prey. Now, this is very essential. This is a very important relationship. Why? Because if assume there is no such lion population, if lion population in one area is eradicated, then there will be no check on the deer population. The number of deers will keep on increasing and increasing. Eventually, what will the deers do? All of them will have requirement of food. So they will start grazing the grasses. But their population ever so is going to continue to increase. There will come a stage where all the grasses will be shaved off from an area. Right. So the producer community themselves can get hampered. So the ecological balance will completely get disturbed. That is why, to keep a population in check, you need the predator community also. Okay. So here, when we talk about predation, it acts as conduits for energy transfer. So basically, it keeps the prey population under control. It helps in maintaining the species diversity of a community by reducing the intensity of competition. Right. For example, let's suppose you have deer, they will compete for the grasses. Let's suppose you have zebras, they will also compete for the grasses. So by keeping both the population in check, who will keep the population in check? The predators. By keeping the population in check, they will ensure that both of them have the availability of the requirement of food, etc. Okay. For human, there is no predator. Out there in the wild, there were many predators, but we have evolved now. We are the most dangerous predators out there. And understand, if the predator is very efficient, it is very intelligent, there also it is dangerous for the predator, because it might end up consuming all its prey and then it might have nothing to eat. You had certain species of dinosaurs which were said to be so evolved hunters, they could hunt down even the T-Rex, right? The carnivore dinosaurs which were thought to be very intelligent. But those species, they went extinct because of lack of availability of food in that entire vicinity where they would live. They would basically outsmart all their prey and they would consume all of them. So at one point of time, they did not have any food to have. So that is when they started going extinct as well. So that is basically the relationship of predator and prey. And then you have competition. So Charles Darwin, when Charles Darwin put forward or postulated the theory of evolution, Charles Darwin said that the theory of natural selection says that always there will be survival of the fittest. Always. So many species, they compete for the same set of resources. It is always going to be the survival of the fittest. The weaker ones, they don't survive. That is why natural selection, nature selects them, right? And many of the species, they have evolved in such a way that competition is bred from the very young age. For example, the eagles, when they reproduce, many of them, they live in very remote and isolated mountainous areas. That is where they build their nest. Now, availability of food is oftentimes very scarce. Now, if they have two young ones or two offsprings, for example, the mother immediately identifies which of the young one is going to survive, which is stronger. So competition starts at that level. And the one which she thinks can survive, she will give the food only to that one. And the weaker one will be left to die. Same is the case with the cheetah population also. For example, amongst the cheetahs which were brought to India, which were relocated to India from Namibia, one of them, one of the young ones, now I hope we are aware that here, few of the young ones were born. One of them was abandoned by their mother. So, because they thought that the young one could not survive. So, that is where competition can start at any phase. And competition always leads to survival of the fittest. Right? Yes, same as the UPSC examination. Good. Now, then, after this, we come to parasitism. That is the host and parasite relationship. So, host parasite relationship. So, when we talk about it, you have certain species which can survive, not only survive, thrive. Thrive in the sense, live peacefully and also multiply in number, as long as they are dependent on a host species. In your life also, you would have had certain friends. If you leave them on their own, they find it very difficult to survive. If you continue to help them, or if you continue to take them out, give them certain amount of food, take them shopping, give them certain materials, they are very happy, right? The parasites of real world. So basically, that is the parasitism, where you are completely living off the host. That is your entire source of survival. For example, when we talk about, let's suppose, virus, COVID virus. So, virus out on its own will find it incredibly difficult to survive. But when they get into the body, they find the conditions suitable to them and they multiply in numbers. Right? So, parasitism is a relationship between species where an organism that the parasites lives in or another organism, the host, causing it some harm, right? And is adapted structurally to this way of life. It does cause some damage, some harm. Not always very significant amount of damage, but some harm, etc., that is caused. Okay? So that is the case of a parasite. Now then, after that, you also have another kind of interaction, which is commensalism. Now, commensalism is that relationship where one species benefits quite significantly, but for the other species, it makes no difference at all. Right? For example, remember during your school days or your college days, you would have few of those rich friends, right? Very rich friends, where many of their followers or colleagues, they would mooch off them, they would take some money out of them, they would take free food out of them. But for the rich friends, it simply did not make a difference at all. They would go on their life as if no difference is created. right? Suppose you're friends with the Ambanis out there and you ask for petty things from Ambanis, for them it will make no difference. Similar kind of relationship exists in the nature also. For example, you have egrets. Egrets, these are the ones. Now, you'll find that they always follow the cattle, the bovine species. They follow them. Why? Because when the buffaloes, the cows, etc., they move, they have a heavy weight. And when they have the heavy weight, basically, they press on the ground. And due to that press, many of the small insects which have been hiding underground, they start escaping. And immediately, these egrets are there to consume them. Right? So that is an example where for the buffalo, it has made no difference at all. But for the egrets, it has benefited by following these buffaloes. Right? So this is where one species benefits and the other is neither benefited nor harmed. Example, egrets. Example, dung beetle. Dung beetle. So you have these beetle small insects which you find in abundance in the dung, cow dung, buffalo dung. Now for the cow, for the buffalo, it does not make any difference in their life that they have carried out the excretion. And what happens to that excreta thereafter? They have no difference, no interest in their life. But for that beetle, it can be the source of food, nourishment, and shelter. Right? Similarly, you can take the example of barnacles and blue whale. You would have seen this when you talk about barnacles and blue whale. So generally, whenever you would have seen, if you have not witnessed a whale, which might be the case for sure in many of the cases, but you would have seen videos, pictures, etc., you would see that you have these whales having these small, tiny white structures. What are these? These are your barnacles. Now, these barnacles, these are those species which are affixed to a surface. They are fixed to a surface. So, when they are fixed, let's suppose you are a species which is living underwater and you are fixed to a surface here and here. So, whichever food is going to float around you, you are going to capture that food. But then, sitting in one place underwater, you might not have all the food moving towards you. So what do these barnacles do? These barnacles, they attach themselves to the tortoises, the turtles, to the whales, etc. For the whales, it hardly makes any difference to them. It doesn't make any difference to them that these barnacles are attached to their body. But for these barnacles, as the whale moves, automatically they start capturing food in the water. So that is where, for the blue whale, no difference at all. For the barnacles, it is a life-giving matter. So this is again an example of commensalism. Okay? Then after that, you have a factor which is mutualism. Mutualism means what? It is beneficial. It is that kind of a relationship where it is beneficial to both of them. Right? So where it is beneficial to both the species. Also known as symbiotic relationship. Symbiotic relationship. Now, in the case of a symbiotic relationship, for example, take the case of the honeybee and the flower. So here, how do the flowers reproduce? With the help of the pollen grains which are present, isn't it? In the flowers. Now, these pollen grains need to be transported and thereby the pollination needs to happen. Now, How will that happen naturally? Maybe the winds will help them, but not always. That is why these flowers, they have that unique coloration pattern. These flowers, they have that unique smell associated with them, so that it attracts these birds and insects and flies. Now, when a honeybee sits on the flower to sap onto the nectar, so that is where these pollen grains, they attach themselves to the body of it, the body of these honeybees. Now, once honeybee is done drinking all the nectar, after that it will go and sit in the other flower. But the pollen which is already attached there then is released. And that is when the pollination happens. That is when reproduction eventually happens. Right? So this is one of the example. Another example, you can take the case of corals. Now, corals, they are basically the animals, again, which are fixed onto the surface underwater. There, they have limited availability of food floating through the water. So they enter into a symbiotic relationship. With whom? With the algal species, that is zooxanthellae. That is the one which provides that coloration to the corals, that unique coloration that you see. So the corals, they have that different color because of that zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae is able to produce food. By utilization of solar rays, it is able to carry out photosynthesis and produce food, which will be beneficial for the corals also. And the corals, they provide them that platform where they can grow. So it is beneficial for both of them. So here, corals and zooxanthellae. Okay. That is basically symbiotic relationship. Like that, these are mutually beneficial. Then you have a relationship which is known as amensalism. Amensalism basically is where one species is not impacted at all, but the other is harmed in the process. Commensalism was what? Where one species was not impacted, the other benefited. Amensalism is where one species is not impacted, the other is harmed in the process. Right? So, where an organism is inhibited or destroyed while the other species remains unaffected. Right? So, here, what is this amensalism? So, for example, as you take a look at this image, you will observe that this central tree that has grown quite significantly. But then what this has done is it has inhabited the resources availability of sunlight in the other smaller trees. So for them, the resource availability is very less. They are harmed. Whereas for this, makes no difference. Makes no difference. And this are harmed. So that is amensalism. So for example, the invasive alien species that you have, which are not naturally found in an area but are introduced from outside. For example, Lantana camara that we have talked about. For example, Senna spectabilis. These are examples of species which carry out amensalism. Right? Example, invasive alien species. Like Lantana camara, Senna spectabilis, yes, red-eared slider turtles, even eucalyptus for that matter in India. Eucalyptus trees, water hyacinth, very good, also known as the terror of Bengal. Now, in all these, when they grow, they utilize all the resources which is available so that the surrounding areas or the species living in the surrounding areas, they don't have that same accessibility. They don't have the same access to the resources. Right? So that is the case of amensalism. right? Lantana camara, it grows in a kind of a very heavy thicket of a bush. So the other plants in that area, they don't get availability of sunlight only. So the plants won't grow. Senna spectabilis grows so quickly that immediately it, just like this, captures the entire region with that beautiful yellowish flowers. That is why people would bring it to India for ornamental purpose, but now it has been introduced into the wild. Red-eared slider turtles, for example, they have very sharp claws by which they can harm the other native turtle species, but for them it doesn't make any difference at all. For example, eucalyptus. Eucalyptus utilizes or absorbs all of the moisture from around them, and you have dry conditions around where normally other plants cannot grow. For example, water hyacinth, which grows on the lakes and the ponds. Now they block the sunlight passing through the water. So the other marine plants, they are unable to grow. But the water hyacinth, it thrives. Okay, so that is basically the example of these various population interactions. Whenever we talk about an ecosystem, for the survivability of the species, you need that flow of energy to happen. Energy from producer to consumer to various different decomposers. Now, that flow of energy can happen in a linear manner where you will have, let's suppose, the grasses consumed by the rabbit consumed by, let's suppose, the wild dogs consumed by lions. It is a linear manner. Or it can be in a diverse manner where the grasses will be consumed by multiple different species, lizards, etc. They will be consumed by multiple different species, all of them. So it can be a food web or it can be a food chain. When we talk about a food chain, here a food chain basically shows how energy is transferred from one living organism to another via food. Right? So a food chain describes how energy and nutrients, they move through an ecosystem from the producer level to the various different consumer levels which are present. Right? So here you have different types of food chains. That is something that we will study tomorrow. Today we shall limit the session here itself. We'll take a couple of questions which have appeared in the examination. Will we be able to tackle a question regarding food chain? We'll try. But first of all, let us tackle a question like this. So here, this is again a PYQ. Which one of the following term describes not only the physical space, this should be very easy, describes not only the physical space occupied by an organism, but also its functional role in the community of organism? Which of these terms? Yes, most of you are correct. I want everybody to get this correct. This is very straightforward. Functional role, for example, what is your level in the food chain? How do you play your role in the food chain? That those are the functional roles. Okay. So majority of you are correct. Not everybody is correct. So majority of you are correct. That is the ecological niche. Okay. I gave you the example of ecological niche here, Vishal. For example, when we talk about the dugongs, their ecological niche will be the coastal areas where you will have the availability of marine plants also and conditions for their survivability also. So that is their ecological niche. Okay, good to know, Abhishek. Now, chains are each organisms that are eaten by the others. Which of them, which of the statements given above is or are correct? Let me know. Think about it. As these insects, as these bees, they go to the flower to sap onto the nectar to drink the nectar. In the meanwhile, the flowers or the pollens associated with the flower, they will attach themselves to the body of these bees. So when the bees go to the next flower, they will drop that pollen and thereby pollination and reproduction can happen. Amit, see, eucalyptus, eucalyptus was introduced into India from where? From the region of Australia. And what is the reason why eucalyptus was introduced? First of all, it was introduced in the region of Nilgiris in order to have a control over the humid condition, moist ground condition. In the region around Uti, for example, due to rainfall, due to high amount of humidity, it was always marshy and damp. That is why Uti, initially in the early 1800s, was not even inhabited. You had Irulas, Todas, and these communities which could survive. No other people would come to this area because it would be so very damp that immediately people would contract malaria. Malaria would be very predominant. That is when certain British officials, the first district commissioner who was made in charge of that, it was the district commissioner of Coimbatore in those times, around the era of 1820s, 1823. That is when the district commissioner introduced eucalyptus in the region of Uti. And those eucalyptus plants, they basically, why? Because so that they could control the amount of moisture in the ground. And they did control the amount of moisture, they absorb that. That is why eucalyptus is so very fast growing. They take in all that moisture, but the surrounding trees, they don't get that amount of moisture anymore. So that is when the surrounding regions, they start becoming drier. That is why in the regions of these eucalyptus trees, because of these dry conditions, forest fires become a commonality. And plus, the oil secreted by the tree adds fuel to the fire. Given the fact that they are short rooted, that basically also means that they don't provide stability to the soil. That is why in the hilly areas, if you have eucalyptus, that is a region prone to landslides also. Okay. I hope you are able to understand the larger picture. So here, majority of you have given the correct answer. The correct answer is A, one only. A food chain illustrates the order in which the chain of organisms feed upon each other. They are found within the population of the species? No, within the various different species. A food chain illustrates the number of organisms? No, that is not the case. Okay. So faster decomposition leads to devoid of nutrients or devoid of organic matter? Devoid of organic matter, which is rich in nutrients. Okay. And ants in the mutual, so it is ants and aphids, so they are mutually beneficial to each other in that particular ecosystem, where they help each other in terms of the food growth and the availability of food as well. Leaderboard. Okay, so that will be all for the session here today, and we carry out this discussion tomorrow also.